As long as you have your grits correct, meaning you sand in the right grit so that your next layer works all the way up into paint, and you're using the right products, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Bodywork is one of those things that's really hard to explain to people. People love to argue about paint and bodywork because people do it differently. So today what I want to do is cover some of the bodywork tips that I can give you guys. I'm not a professional, but then again, most people aren't professionals. First off, what you need to know about bodywork is it's all mental, okay? It's all a mental game. All you have to do is get started. Just throw caution to the wind. Now, I've already started on this car. I've applied some lightweight filler. So this is polyester filler. Polyester filler can go over the top of paint, bare metal, or other fillers, or primer. So a lot of times you hear people say you can't put filler over the top of paint. Yes and no. The stuff that they're talking about is a traditional like Bondo filler, okay? It's real thick. They don't recommend that you put that over paint. So like I said, this is a lightweight filler right here. This stuff sands like butter. All right, so we had a couple little dings here. So I just smeared some of this stuff on. All this black stuff you see here is actually a guide coat. It's actually not a guide coat. If I'm being honest with you, all it is just some SEM trim black. This stuff dries almost instantly, okay? So your cheap dollar store flat black will work. It just takes a little bit longer to dry. Don't let anybody tell you not to use it. You can absolutely use it, okay? You don't have to have spray on guide coat or either the rub on stuff. They make it in a powder form as well. You don't have to have that. So what I want to do right now is just show you guys how easy this is to jump into this, okay? Now you might think you need one of these sanders. You don't have to have that for the whole life of the job. You absolutely do not have to have air sander or electric sander or anything like that. It's going to be a lot harder if you don't, but honestly, I prefer to block sand by hand pretty much everything anyway. I will occasionally use a sander, but it is not necessary. But here's where we're at with this. If you have an air compressor, if you are going to paint your car, more than likely you have an air compressor to do that with, right? Unless you're going to rent a shop or a booth or something. So if you have an air compressor, you might as well go ahead and pick yourself up a cheap little palm sander or an electric sander. Either way, both work. Let's talk about grits real quick. This is a 40 grit paper right here. It's just a stick-on stuff. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This is 80. I forgot I swapped out to this. So this is 80 grit and 40 would work, even for this lightweight filler. But you only want to take it down so far with the really rough grit. And then you're going to want to go up to what I choose is like a 180. So let's go ahead and just get started with this. What we're going to do is block sand this car in a cross hatch pattern, and that will keep everything level. What you have to understand is if you have a low spot right here, when you put your filler on, you're going to put a big spot, right? Just for one little dent. And what you're doing is bridging the gap. Now that's going to come into play a lot later on when, let's say, you have a dent right here on a body line. See how this body line is? Now if you have a big dent right here, so one of the things that you can do is just slap your filler across there, lay this block, and just start working that down. So since you have metal here and here on this side, right, this is going to ride on this side of the metal and this side of the metal. So what it's going to do is not allow your block, you're not going to sand through the metal. That's just not going to happen. So you're going to sand until you get down to metal, and hopefully by that point you have leveled off the Bondo or the filler that you had right here. And if you didn't, you just add a little bit more to it. Bridging gaps is the key to all of this, okay? If you're doing body work and you're having to use filler, if you think of it that way, you can't go wrong. It's about the best way to think about it. Anyway, let's go ahead and do a little bit right here, and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. The best thing you can do is just get down here like this and get ready to make a mess. Wear some sort of mask, dust mask, because the stuff's going to get everywhere. Okay, so I want to show you guys exactly what we've got right here. As you can see, this is where we sanded, and we still have all of that black right here, right? That is our low spot. We're trying to sand this down enough so that this matches it. So that's it. We're going to bridge the gap here. You have to know the size of the dent that you were working with to start with. The size of this dent was actually very, very, very small. So I know I have plenty of material here to work with. As I'm watching this video, I realized that I did not fully explain myself as to why I made the switch over to the palm sander, to the DA. I did that just to prove a point, to show that you can use a palm sander over the affected area. If it's a small area and you've applied filler, you can use your sander to, there again, bridge the gap. Now, this is a fairly large area to be using a sander on, but the point is I want to show you that you can do this. And if you do make a mistake, and if you gouge your filler because you're using a palm sander and maybe you kind of dip down into a spot and you create more of a low spot, if that's the case, it's not the end of the world. You can apply some more filler and you can go back over this again. You just have to feel things out. I'm also blending the edges of the filler with the sander, which there again is not something you would normally do, but can it be done? Yes, in certain situations. This area was actually really small that we were trying to fill, and I knew that I wasn't going to need that much filler anyway, so I went ahead and used the sander. Guys, I'm just showing you different ways that you can achieve the same result. Okay, your primer will fill a lot of small imperfections and small lows. I do want to tell you not to rely fully on your primer. That's not really a good thing, but at the same time, it does help you, and it's a tool that you can use. Primers are not what they used to be. The DTMs, the direct to metal primers that you guys may have heard about or seeing nowadays, that stuff can go directly over bare metal, Bondo, paint, other primer. Like, it works on everything, right? And it's a medium to high build primer, so you can actually sand that stuff out and use it as your final finished coat. So with that being said, now I prefer to block this out. What I will do is come back in with some primer, right? I'll shoot this and then I'll hit it with a guide coat, and then I'll see what we've got. I'm pretty sure we're going to be fairly close, but there is a chance that we have a couple highs and lows here. So that's how I would address this. Go ahead, finish it out with some 180, which is what I was using there, on a block. Try to block it out as best I can until I start hitting metal, shoot some primer on it, and check it again. Ultimately, it's up to you before you move to the final step to paint your car. So if you're seeing something that's not right, just go back and fix it. There's nothing I could do to this panel to make it to where I couldn't fix it, for the most part. I mean, I guess you could, I don't know, you could kick a big enough dent in it maybe to where you don't want to fix it. The whole point is BODYWORK is very forgiving, and you can do it any way you want to. Something else to think about, even if you do mess this up or you decide that it's not for you, you've tried and you can't figure it out, you don't know what you're doing, the body shops will still take your car with whatever work you've already done to it, right? So if you had intentions of taking it to the body shop and then you just like, you know what, screw it, I'll try it myself, I say try it yourself. You're not out that much money, and in the end, if it doesn't work out, you can still just take it there, and they don't care what you've done. They'll just knock it out regardless. Matter of fact, you may have even saved them some time versus what it would have been. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Overall, this feels really good. There is something right there. I bet it's that Bondo line right there, that filler line. Let me block sand that out. I'll tell you what, let's do this. Just to show you guys it doesn't matter how you get it done, I'm going to do something just because it's right here. I'm going to wet sand this out. I'm just going to jump straight into it, okay? I'm not telling you this is the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it. All I'm telling you is it doesn't really matter how you get to the end goal as long as you get there, okay? So, screw it. Let's just go ahead and wet sand this thing, which I enjoy doing a lot, actually. That was too fine of a grit, so that was 500 grit on there, and it really didn't do much. It did slick it up a little bit, but for the most part, it didn't do much. And guys, that's the whole point of all this, is trial and error, okay? Let's see. It's best if you can use like a little rag or something to kind of feel. There's still, I mean, ever so slightly, a little bit of an imperfection there. Let's see how the rest of the car best thing you can do is not look at the panel and just rub, and then wherever you feel the spot, look at it. Feels pretty good. You will feel a little bit of variation between the different paints and fillers and stuff like that, so you can kind of feel that. This down here needs to be finished out. I didn't finish it. So I just want to go ahead and show you guys that, right? Just get out here and play around. It doesn't matter. All you're trying to do is slap some filler in some spots, cross hatch it out, get this thing level, prime it, spray some guide coat on it, block it out again, and see if you have any low spots. If you have low spots, take some polyester filler, the lightweight stuff, and apply it straight over the top of your primer, and it'll hold and it'll work. So what I'm trying to say here is there's no right or wrong way. There are wrong things you can do, sure. For instance, I sanded this with 1,000 grit sandpaper, right? So I'm sanding this, I'm trying to work on my Bondo. And for one thing, you're never gonna get the Bondo cut. And another thing, even if you did, you wouldn't be able to apply your primer over the top of 1,000 grit scuff. I wouldn't recommend doing that anyway. You need somewhere around a 180 to 220, 320, something like that at the most before you put your primer down. Some people go as low as 80 grit on it if you're gonna put a high build primer. I try to stay around the 180 mark. So, you know, that would be a bad idea to do. Let's say you got your primer on your car and you block your primer out with 80 grit, and then you're trying to paint the car. That's not gonna work. I mean, that is the wrong way to do that. I'm sorry. You're gonna have scratch marks from hell. But my point is the process of getting you there, as long as you get there in the end, it doesn't really matter. Let's talk about something. I just sanded this with 500 grit, right? That's what I told you guys I used. That's fine if I want to use that. But now, because I've used 500 grit and I told you we have a little bit of a low spot here, I need to scuff this up with probably some 180 before I can apply my primer. That's simple, right? You guys, you know, think of it as before I prime, at least 180. 180 it, shoot some primer on it, or 220, something like that. Shoot some primer on it, then that locks the primer in. You're good to go. Also, another thing you can do is just take 2 pieces of sandpaper like this, put them on a block, wrap it around, and guys, that'll work just fine. So I do want to take a second here and try to block this out a little bit more. It's all about trial and error. It's all about trying things. So I thought that there was a low spot right here, but it wasn't. It was just too much Bondo. Now look, perfectly fine. I feel nothing. Now you may see this right here and think, oh, well, that must be a high spot. Not necessarily. The body lines on the car, it all depends on how you're following those body lines. This car actually has a high spot through the center of it right here. That's factory on these cars. They actually bulge out a little bit. So by me sanding like this, it's hitting the high spot here and not that one. That's what that is, just so you guys kind of know. You have to know the body lines of the car, but ultimately it's all about feel and eyesight. So if I take my rag, feels freaking fine to me, man. So another quick trick that I want to show you, now I showed you in the other video before, is some water. Take some water and wet this stuff down. Now you could prime it first, but this will work. It's going to be a little harder to see, but what we're going to do is mimic a clear coat on the car, and you guys know the clear coat is what allows you to be able to see imperfections. All right, you have to wet it down pretty good, and then you have to get yourself at an angle to where you can see down it. I see maybe something right there, so I may need to block sand on that a little bit, but overall that's a pretty straight panel. Even if you do see something in this panel right now, a very, very slight wave, I would let the primer handle that. You got to give your primer a job, right? Here's the ultimate issue that you're going to run into. If you try to block this car out, I mean laser straight, and what I'm trying to say is you're looking for perfection before you ever put the primer on. Great, kudos to you if you can do that. I don't have the time for that, because to get to that point, you're going to have to continually add filler, and I mean microscopic amounts of filler, right, to get this thing to level out just beautiful. So if you see it just a little bit of a wave in it, wait, put some primer on it and block it back out, then see if the wave's still there. That's primer's job. Don't ever underestimate what primer can do. Ultimately, you don't want very much primer on your car. You can load it down with primer. Sure, you can put 3 nice wet coats on the car and get a good buildup of primer. But ultimately, if your bodywork's pretty good, you're gonna sand 90% of that off. All you're left with is just a nice, good skim coat of primer, okay? But it can work as a filler for you. I mean, a lot of this stuff that's its job. I mean, that's what it's designed to do, is basically liquid Bondo. So anyway, I do want to talk to you guys a little bit about curves and things like this, because that's kind of hard to do. These DuraBlocks work really good. You can wrap your sandpaper around it, and you can get into these grooves right here, and you can really straighten something out. But there again, if you're going to do that, you really need to use this as a bridge. So what we can do is we can take this and we can ever so slightly just massage that, bridging the gap, okay? Remember that. We got known good metal over here and known good metal over here. This is the area we're trying to work on. As long as you stay within that, you'll be fine. You'll be able to level it all out. Okay, before we do that, just because I want to show you guys it doesn't matter how you do this or whatever. Let's see. You do need to clean everything, all right? This is wax and grease remover right here. Couple squirts. You really need to spray it on your rag first, but a couple squirts will do fine, okay? And here is a high build primer in a spray can. This is the only time I recommend that you rely on this stuff. You need to be using a good primer, a good 2K primer. But for something like this, if you wanted to see if your body work was good, you can definitely use this, because you're going to sand the majority of it off anyway. Let's put a light coat of primer on this. I'll guide coat it, and then we'll block it out, and we'll see if we got any more problems. You could just guide coat this and block it, but for the sake of this, let's just go ahead and do this.
So you're going to see me using a spray can 1K, meaning a 1-part high build primer from SEM here. I really like this stuff. It's good to check your work if you want to spray it over the car and kind of like wet it and get a good look for the car. It works great. But let's be honest here, if you're going to be spraying over bare metal, you need either an epoxy primer or a self-etching primer to spray over bare metal. Self-etching has an acid in it. It'll eat into the bare metal and it'll bond good. Epoxy primer just works on everything. It works great. That's not what I have here. I'm mainly doing this to check my work. Later on, I will come back and sand most all of this off. But in a pinch, if you absolutely had to, you could use this as a get-by over a very small bare metal spot. I still wouldn't choose it, but it has been done many times.
Now, why am I doing this? Why would I show you this in the middle of me not completely finishing this out? Because I know a lot of you want to see instant results, okay? Especially if you're new to this. You want to know that what you're doing is good. You're doing a good job. So by doing something like this, you might not do it on every panel, okay? You might just do this a time or two to verify that what you're doing is working. It's fine. Now, we're not going to go heavy. We're just going to do 2 light coats here, okay? I would never intentionally put this primer on real heavy, because it's a 1K primer. This stuff takes a while to shrink up, and you don't want it on the car and then it shrink up on you, you know, a couple days later or a week later. That's good enough for what we're trying to do here. 2 light coats. And now you can kind of step back and look at your work. You're not gonna be able to see anything until we spray this thing with some water. And that's the first thing we're gonna do. Now that we have a uniform look, we're gonna let this dry up a little bit. We're gonna hit it with some water, and then we're gonna look, and we're gonna find the angles and see how close we are. See how good our body work actually is. I think it's gonna be pretty close. There again, we don't know. When I talk about a good, 2K primer, this is what I'm talking about right here, okay? So we could use that, but I don't want to mix it up in my gun all the time. This is a quick, easy way for you to verify that your work is going good. That's all this is. So don't ever rely fully on it. I don't want you guys to do that. But to check your work, there's nothing wrong with it. I wanted to come in here and wet this down and give you a uniform coat, or as much as I could anyway, to show you guys just how quickly body work can happen for you, right? How quickly it can progress. You guys just saw a glob of Bondo over here, right? You saw me come in and work the center of it down, change grits of sandpaper. I had the wrong grit, And then come up here and blend the edges, which people tell you do not do. Don't blend your edges first or last or whatever the case. Work it all together. Guys, there's gonna be times where you're gonna have to blend the edges of Bondo. Just be careful with it and don't like gouge it and try to make it blend. But in other words, I was doing things that a lot of people would probably tell you not to do. That's not the right way to do it. It's all about the end result, right? The point is, guys, I want to show you just how quickly this stuff can come together for you. That is a very straight panel. See how easily your job can progress on you? Look at that. We went from a door that had dents and stuff all in it to a pretty straight freaking door just that quick. There's a spot down there. Remember I told you guys that I knew I needed to finish that? Look, now it's starting to show up, see? So this primer can do a lot of different things for you. You come in, you shoot you a little bit of primer. It'll give you a good guide, whether you still have highs or lows, anything like that. And the primer also works good to show up any imperfections as far as like Bondo and things like that that you couldn't see because of all the multicolors going on. So real quick, like I want to talk about doing things correctly. What does that actually mean? What do people mean by that? Well, I covered it earlier. I touched on it, but it's simple. Make sure your car is clean for the first thing, right? I don't care how you sand it. You can come in with 36 grit and just wear the paint off of it if you want to. If you know that there's a dent there, just wear it out with 36 grit or whatever you've got, even a grinder. Just be careful. But get it down to bare metal. Scratch it all to hell. It doesn't matter. Pick you a spot, slap some filler on this thing, hit it with a cheese grater with some 180, 40 grit, 80, 220. I don't give a shit. Knock it down. The only thing that matters after that point is that you finish with a rough enough grit in your sandpaper when you do your Bondo work that your primer can lay in there and bite down. Primer will cover most of that stuff up. All those little scratches, it'll cover it up. So if you've done that, now your primer's sticking. All you have to do from there is block out your primer with probably like a 220 or something to make sure that the car is perfectly straight. Okay? If you hit bare metal, dust a little more primer on it. What I recommend you do is after you're done with your body work, hit the whole car with primer, block the whole thing out with a guide coat, make sure there's no low spots, prime it once again, and then block it out with like a 500, 600. You'll never touch metal at that point, and you can go on, you can sand this thing, and you can paint your car. I will pull up the sheet so that you guys can see everything that they tell you can do with this primer. If you have any interior dye on hand, let's just use that as a guide coat. Look, doesn't matter. It makes no difference what you use. Well, as far as color wise. So there's our guide coat. All you need is something to differentiate. So when we start doing this, oh, and let me show you another reason why I like this. Take a little bit of the dust from your car, rub it on your hand, and look how quick that dries. Look at that. We just sprayed that. We're ready to sand right now. Now, this is your choice. You can sand this back down with anything you want because this is not your final coat of primer here. You're just using this to make sure your body work is good. Take our block. You can use a big block. You can use a smaller block, but I'd prefer you not do that. Okay, well, let's just get it. I'm gonna prove a point to you guys, and halfway through this, I'm just gonna switch to wet sanding, okay? Just because I wanna see what kind of work I'm doing. And the wet sanding works really good and gives you a quick result. And it doesn't clog your paper up as bad.
So I'm switching to wet sanding here just to show you guys that you can come in and wet sand your guide coat out, which is typically what I prefer to do. I'll come in, I'll wet sand with typically like a 400, and I'll knock that guide coat down and see if I still have any low spots, high spots, whatever the case may be. As you can see, I started out with a 180 grit dry. It works pretty good. I'll move over to, I think this is 500 grit wet. At this point, you're not trying to shape the panel. All you're trying to do is show the work that you've done. And it will take down some of the high spots and match things up and start to level it out for you, but not on the level that the 180 will. Just so you know, this panel will pretty much be blocked down to nothing, and then I'll come in with a 2K primer. This is just so that you can see the work that you have done on the car already.
Looks like we got a little bit of a low spot right here. So this is 500 grit. Doesn't work the best for cutting, but we can. Just take a little bit longer. Let's try to cut this spot out. See if we can get it out with the primer that's already on there. A lot of times you can. And yep, it looks like it's coming out, guys. There again, don't focus on one spot too much. Kind of move it around. You don't want to dig in.
Before we move on, I want to remind you guys, as you get better with your bodywork, as you get more familiar with your capabilities and how things work, what I'm showing you is a way for you to build confidence in yourself and the work that you're doing. You would not want to address every panel this way. You want to get to a point to where you can get the car straight and have confidence in yourself with using your fillers and not relying on constantly having to prime the car to be sure of it. This is the thing. Once you get into the better primers, the high build primers, guys, if you get your bodywork close with your fillers, your primer will come in and fill gaps for you, right? You also want to make sure that in between each coat of primer, you're waiting the proper amount of time so that this doesn't shrink up on you later on. One of the issues that you'll run into is if you put too much primer on at one time, it'll look good, it'll look like it's dry, you'll sand it, and it'll shrink up on you later. So keep your coats thin and then come back in and take as much of this primer back off the car as you can, and that will keep it from shrinking up on you as bad.
Another thing you need to understand is none of these panels are completely straight. Like when you hear people say they want it flat, what you're actually saying is you want the eye to perceive it as smooth. That's what you want. You can actually have a high spot right through here, and as long as it is blended well and transitioned well, the eye typically won't catch it. Sometimes, sure, yeah, it will, but like this door has got a high spot in the center of it. That's just the way these doors are. They all have that. So I went ahead and finished wet sanding this panel. We got a little bit of a low spot right there, as you can see a difference in the coloration, and a little down here. Other than that, this thing blocked out really good. The goal here is to work one section at a time. Get it knocked out, get it really close to, I would say, nothing worse than that, okay? Prime this thing, let the primer do its job. Remember, you can always come back and put polyester filler over the top of primer so it's good, right? If you prime this thing out and you block it out and you got a couple little spots, mix up some of that lightweight poly filler and you'll be good to go. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. I hope it helps, and as always, thanks for watching. We're working on getting this car really straight, guys. In the video, you're gonna see me working on this spot up here. I am looking for a very straight car, but it doesn't absolutely have to be perfect. And I think most of you are gonna feel the same way. Anyway, this car is coming along, guys. It should be a pretty straight car. So just as an example, this car over here was beat to hell. This was a parts car whenever I started with it, okay? Take your time, use the correct grits, use the correct products, but just be loose with it, okay? That's all I'm gonna say.